This position, there's a little bit of, I've never been completely confident about, exactly the spacing and the direction of the tablet. This tablet, of course, has Gladden pointed that direction. If you look at the reed maps, and I've even seen pictures long ago that had this tablet not here. Of course, they put it on the park boundary now, but it used to sit down the road here, and it was right back there. It was aligned on the road like the Gladden's brigade was coming down straight down the road, and I'm just not sure that's the case. If you look at these maps, Gladden starts. This is his position. Right here. And he winds up here. If he moved cross country just like Shaver does right here, and Wood does right here, and Claiborne does right here, that would have brought him through this intervening land that the trust has just bought, of course. If he came straight down the road like the reed map has, and by the way, the reed map and the tablets on the battlefield don't always match up. I don't know if y'all have caught that or not. That said, remember that tablature, is that a word? Tablature on the battlefield is very much a snapshot in time, and it doesn't pick up the fluid movements of so and so. But I'm just not convinced that Gladden came all the way out the Bark Road and made this big swing out and then came straight up the road. I'm of the mind that he came more in this direction, and Chalmers probably swung out perhaps this direction. But Gladden, I don't think the old pictures in the reed maps not particularly. I don't know that I ascribe to that. As a result, Johnston, not thinking Johnston went out the Bark Road and came up. Obviously, he's been out in this area, 2 cabins and so on. So I think he basically made the same trick that we just did through the woods there. He could hear the firing in front. He knew where the Confederate lines were, and he's going to follow the Confederate position.
Did he went around in a circle?
I'm sure he probably did. There's no video or... That's what y'all wanted to follow.
They were initially lined with data.
Bunches and bunches and bunches of transactions, only 4. And the main one that really caused all the problems was the Pittsburgh landing. It was the Meeks that didn't want to sell it, and they wanted just these exorbitant prices and all that, and they wound up condemning it. And now the feeling around here is that they came in and they stole our land. These folks that say that, their ancestors were glad to sell this land because it's hard scrabble land. It's not good for farming, and they were having a tough time and all that. And so you sell your land, you get to live in your house lifetime. That's a pretty good deal. Plus you get to go to work for $1 a day on the park, federal job, paid in good federal money, So they were glad to do it. They were happy about it, but it's become the story now around kind of here, among some locals, is that they stole our land. They came in and all that. And you see that at Smoky Mountains and everywhere else. So.
Let Meek's land fly. Dr. Meek told his family before he died,
don't ever sell it. Yeah. You can get a good picture of the Locust Grove Ravine. We're going to cross that a little bit later. This is the headwaters. In fact, if you look on maps or go up on the road and walk down that road, this doesn't really cross the road per se, not in any way this. So particularly east of the Eastern Corinth Road is when you start getting kind of the heavy dips here. And you can see why Prentice initially put his line out here, because you've got a good field of fire down there, and you always want to make them come up the ridge, of course. Even here, though, you're still on the geographic crest rather than the military crest. I think we talked about this last year, didn't we? If you're on the geographic crest as we are here, you can look back here and it doesn't get much higher whatsoever. Maybe a little bit back in here, but this is about as high as you're going to get. But here, you can see that it goes over the bluff, and there's an area down there that you can't hit with your rifles. So you're giving the enemy a chance to come down the other side when you can fire at them, shoot at them, and all that. And then they're going to have a break period there where they can regroup and reform one of these lulls kind of that we're talking about. We'll see that later in terms of Johnston. And then they can start out from there, and you won't really know when they're coming, that type thing. The more optimal place, of course, there wasn't a fence here at the time, not like this anyway. There might have been a split rail fence, but they didn't worry about whose land it was. It was Doc Meeks or whoever's.
By that time, what it used for firewood too, probably?
Yeah, they would use for firewood. The optimal place would have been go a little bit forward to the military crest where you could see all the way down that hill, and it wouldn't be a dead space. So this line, Prentice's initial line, is not particularly well posted, if indeed it was actually here. And you see the other tablet. I think there's another right down there. We'll see. It kind of makes me wonder a little bit, and I don't remember. I'm gonna go read that tablet. Does it say the line was right here, or does it say, some of these tablets it'll say 200 yards forward or something like that? There are tablets off the park, but the line could have been conceivably a little farther forward. Engaged here, okay. I'm thinking that Prentice's line could indeed have been a little bit farther forward, but this is the boundary of the park, so we got to put our tablet on our park plan. Glad marker's another example. Yep. Yeah. All right, let's walk on down. I think there's another tablet. Yeah, I see it down there, and you get another view. But we'll head back into the woods to 18th Wisconsin County. See Prentice's second position back there as well. I heard a second. Yep. I remember last year you were having trouble with your knee or something. It's still.
It's good.
It's good now.
Tim,
Good.
I got a question. Well, that was Spainfield and Prentice. But my understanding, what I've read, is that Madison Miller first put his 18th Missouri on the north end of the field, behind a bunch of debris and everything. And Prentice comes up and orders him to the south end.
Right.
And you can read in some of the accounts by the Prentice haters about what a stupid thing that was for him to do, to put them in, the front open field to their rear. But so that is Prentice's first line. But Madison Miller writes about that 20 years later.
Right.
He's still pissed off about it.
Yeah. And Miller, he's it's interesting. Miller kind of, some of the things you read, you can just flat tell they're telling a bunch of bull, but Miller is he seems to be pretty open about this kind of stuff. In fact, he does make his line first there and Prentice some orders to the front, and then later on he orders him back, and then when things start happening out here and the 18th Wisconsin falls and down the line and so on, Prentice writes to Miller and says, remove your brigade, remove it and all that. And I don't know if you read this account or not, but Miller says Prentice had to repeat the order before it sunk in, and finally he decided, we better get out of here. So.
Miller's guys writes later about, they've moved across the field and they know the rebels are coming in the front, and they're looking back at the field behind them, and they're concerned about whether they have to give up. Yeah. That they would be, shooting ducks as they ran back across the field. But it was Winston Groom in his book he just did on Shiloh, calls Prentice an imbecile for that move.
Well,
but I was, Larry Daniels supported it, and when you think about it, it seems to be the right thing because the 16th Wisconsin has moved forward.
Right. Well, you can see the terrain.
And the terrain, the ravine right in front.
The brigade's not out there in isolation. They got Peabody's brigade that they're having to trying to coordinate with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And the 16th has moved forward. Madison Miller is kind of one of those. He's sort of like Peabody. Peabody gets a lot more press than Miller does, but Miller is, I don't know if I'll go so far as to say an unsung hero, but he's one of those stable guys that you just don't hear much about. I mean, he commanded his brigade here, he got him out and formed a second line, and in large part, a lot of Prentice's line is Miller's, not necessarily Peabody's. And even some of the regiments, it illustrates how they were able to get out. The 61st Illinois that we just passed back there retreats more this direction than they do that direction. And while they're not with Miller's brigade, they do fight as a regiment Initially, they fight in the peach orchard. They're over around the hornet's nest a little bit. There's a tablet in the rear of the hornet's nest over there for them. So Miller, and he is a brigade commander. You hear about Prentice surrendering and brigade commanders getting killed and all that, but Miller was surrounded and captured in the hornet's nest. And that's a pretty high-ranking brigade commander. It's a pretty high-ranking somebody to get captured, but you never hear about Miller, and I'm not sure why that is. His diary is in the Missouri Historical Society, though, but doesn't say a whole lot about Shiloh, unfortunately.
It doesn't? Well, it's on my list to check out tonight.
Well, yeah, there's not much at all in there about Shiloh. All right, bringing here, this is kind of one of the meccas of Johnston lovers and all of that. The 18th Wisconsin Camp, you hear a whole lot about it. Anybody been out in here before? Several of you probably have, a couple of you. This is where you hear the famous stories about Johnston came, and for a couple of hours he will stay here and he will direct the battle, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. The most famous story, of course, is that this is where Johnston sees, well, there are various parts of the story. He sees one of his staff officers come out of a tent and just has an armload full of Federal overcoats. And he says, "Look, I've got overcoats for the whole staff." And Johnston says, "We're not here to plunder, son." The famous example, of course, though, is that Johnston sees one of his men looting the camp, and he says, "We're not here to plunder and pillage." He thinks he might have gotten on to him a little bit too much, so he grabs this tin cup that we hear about, and he says, "Let this be my spoils of the day, and let's go do our duty." That supposedly happens here in the 18th Wisconsin Camp. Before that, though, there is quite a lot of fighting in this area, some pretty important fighting. For instance, the 18th Wisconsin will take its position, and you see the tablet there. You also see just to the front of it, if you look around that tree there, you'll see a red tablet. I don't know if you see it really good, but you can kind of see it in the woods there. That's Chalmers' brigade. So we followed Johnston's line. Of course, we saw Claiborne earlier at Fraley Field, then Wood, then Shaver, then Gladden. Now Chalmers has moved up on the right of Gladden's brigade and has come through the ravine down there and is basically hitting the flank of the 18th Wisconsin infantry at this point, which is the flank of Madison Miller's brigade. Incidentally, I found just probably in working on this book, the research is like a treasure hunt. I guess that's why I like it so much. But I found the greatest thing, probably the most interesting thing I've ever found that I didn't expect to find, was in the Robert A. Smith papers in the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. If you look in, and we could get the OR out, but if you look in the OR, you got Chalmers' report, and then you don't have any regimental reports whatsoever for Chalmers' brigade. And I, lamented that. I would like to know a little more about what Chalmers did, because in my thinking, Chalmers is probably the hardest fighting Confederate brigade in the Confederate Army. At this point, if we ever want to do a hike on Chalmers, boy, that'll be a heck of a hike if we wanted to do that. But I thought, well, I'm going to look at some of the regimental commanders. Whitfield let's see, I think Whitfield is wounded. Rankin is killed. Hamilton Mason resigns immediately after this. 7th Mississippi. Fant of the 5th Mississippi doesn't have anything in his papers, but I looked in the Robert A. Smith papers in Jackson, Mississippi, and lo and behold, there's a draft copy of his Shiloh report in the papers there. Never been published, never anything. And he talks about how, and we know some of the problems of Chalmers' brigade, that one wing of it, Chalmers is over on the right wing, probably to try to keep an eye out for Lick Creek and to make sure that he reaches that far. He's supposed to plug the gap and all that. So when he issues the order to charge, only the right flank actually moves forward. The 10th Mississippi and so on the left flank kind of comes following along a little bit. But Smith talks about how he laid out these elaborate plans that he's going to get his guys in the bottom of the ravine and everybody realign and all that, and we're going to start marching forward, and only when I say charge and all that are we going to move forward and all that. And he starts his men down, and they're supposed to do all of this, but the Wisconsin boys start firing at them and all that, and everything just goes into chaos, and they start running up the hill. Basically, is what he says. It's really entertaining. Really kind of gives you a picture of the confusion of battle and how once they start shooting, forget the lineup and the orders and all that. We're going. It's also out in this area, and you see the tablets out to our right out there. The one on the far right is some Confederate artillery, and then there's another one, Rutledge's battery, and so on. There's a tablet also out there. We're going to see it a little farther down, the 18th, or the Michigan, 15th Michigan. That's who it is, 15th Michigan, Colonel Oliver. Now, these are the same Michiganers that, of course, will be at Corinth and Alexander's Crossroads and all that, and be out front. Oliver's a little bit jumpy. You can see it then. He's a little bit jumpy now. Oliver was supposed to, the 15th Michigan was supposed to come out here and camp as kind of the extension of Miller's brigade, be a part of the brigade. And actually they sent 2 companies, I believe they sent 2 companies out the night before to kind of lay out the camps and decide, and the rest of the regiment begins to move forward. It's that regiment, of course, that comes forward the next morning without ammunition, and they're told to go in line, and Oliver says, we don't have any ammunition. And they say, well, what you have your bayonets for? This is supposedly Prentice and Miller. And they wisely, I think, figure out that bayonets ain't gonna do no good here, so let's turn around and go back. And they fight the rest of the battle. You'll see their individual tablets on the second day as well. There is supposed to be a 3rd brigade of Prentice's division, made up of several other units that are just arriving. For instance, 15th and 16th Iowa that we'll see over at Jones Field, or we won't see today, but that you see over at Jones Field. The 23rd Michigan is also showed up, and all these units arrive either the day before or that morning. 15th Iowa arrives the morning of April the 6th. They're on the same boat, the Minnehaha, with the wife of W.H.L. Wallace, Ann Wallace. So collectively, 23rd Missouri, 15th, 16th Iowa, one of those Iowa units I forget, I believe was supposed to be the 4th Regiment of Miller's Brigade, and then the 15th Michigan. Throw all those together, and there's supposed to be a 3rd regiment, or 3rd Brigade of Prentice's division, camped farther in that gap, this half-mile gap between here and Stuart, that we're going to see next, that plays a part in what's going on with Johnston and all this. Had they been there, had the Confederates attacked 2 days later, they probably would have been there, and it might have made a major difference in terms of how Johnston perceives what's going on here. So let's get back to Johnston and the decisions that he makes here in this Wisconsin camp. There's been some, how do I put this, there's been some writing and some, I guess, theorizing, and it makes a whole lot of sense, although again we go back to the fact that we don't have Johnston's report. Wish we did. But the idea is that when Chalmers attacks and Gladden attacks, that they hit Miller here and they don't hit anything till they get to Stuart out there, and they don't hit him yet. So they hit just thin air out there where Prentice's 3rd Brigade is supposed to go. So as the Confederates are moving forward like this, they're fighting all the way from here to Shiloh Church. But those extending out through here aren't hitting anything. So Johnston, again, in this area near the front lines pushing people forward, logically thinks, I found what? That left flank. Now, whether he's hearing this and all that, we can't definitively say that that's what's going on in his mind, but the results are pretty vivid, and it's hard to dispute. It's at this point, and critical decision made by Johnston, apparently at this point in the Wisconsin camp where he stays for a couple hours here. He will begin his turning movement to turn that Union left flank and drive them into the swamps of Owl Creek. Still going against what Beauregard is doing on the other side of the battlefield. Maybe it's arguable whether he's doing it purposefully or I don't think he's maliciously saying, well, I'm going to teach Johnston a lesson, and I'm going to do the exact. There are. Have you ever known people that just would do that just for the sake of it, just to be malicious? I don't know that Beauregard, as cantankerous and full of himself as he could be, was going that far, but they are obviously working at cross purposes. But Johnston tries to start that turning movement, and the results of that, I think, are unmistakable. We could look in the official records if we got them out. Shaver talks about he receives orders to pivot to his left and move forward. Wood talks about he receives orders to pivot. Regimental commander after regimental commander talks about these orders to turn and to pivot to the left. So I think it's unmistakable the result. And Johnston obviously orders this done. Why? Whether it's because he hears nothing but silence out here where the fighting is going on the rest out here, that's logical. Can't really nail it down, but it sounds plausible. Is that the wisest decision to be made here? Obviously not, because is this the flank of the Union Army? No, this is the flank of the center and there just happens to be a gap here. We know Stewart is farther out there. We're going to see his position next. We know that Hurlbut is coming up to support Stewart. So this is by no means the flank of the Federal Army. So Johnston has started a premature turning movement, and he's going to realize very, very quickly, okay, I acted just a little bit too hastily here. Word reaches him apparently here again in the 18th Wisconsin Count that there are other Federals out here. He gets several pieces of information, the most notable and famous of which is Samuel Lockett, who Bragg has sent out earlier that morning, like at 4 a.m., and he scouts out there and he finds Stewart's camps and he watches the sentinels. At one point he talks about he slipped by a sleepy sentinel leaning against a tree and all that, and he watches the officers shining their boots and doing all this. Where we're going across Locust Grove Branch, he starts out on those high ridges, and he crosses the branch and goes up toward the camps and so on, and then goes back at various different places. And then he will come and report to Johnston. Lockett comes up to Johnston and says, I have some intelligence, and Johnston says, who are you? He says, well, I'm Lockett, and Bragg's staff sent me out this morning. He says, okay, tell me as quickly as you can and as succinctly as you can what you have to say. You ever known people like that too, that just go on and on and on? Tell me what you got to say. Tell it now. I got other things to be doing. So Lockett tells him, hey, there's a Federal division out there. Don't rush me too much. You want to hear this. I promise you do. He didn't tell him that, but that's probably what he was thinking. There's a Federal division out there, so Johnston has to make some quick decisions. This is when he calls Chalmers and Jackson back from they pushed on forward through Prentice's camps up toward the peach orchard. He calls them back. They go around the Bark Road and come in on the flank out there. I used to think, and reading the sources, it's a little bit wishy-washy. As Johnston is watching Chalmers go over the hill and all that, I was thinking kind of it might be here, but I think it's evident now, as I've seen other sources, that Johnston will ultimately leave the 18th Wisconsin Camp. I think he crosses back over Locust Grove Branch, and on those tall ridges south of Locust Grove Branch. I dare say none of you have been back in there, have you? That's where we're going, some new areas that you'll see. I think he ranges around those hills. There are pieces of evidence. For instance, Joseph Wheeler talks about in the 19th Alabama or 21st Alabama, one of those Alabama regiments, Jackson's brigade, says that Johnston issued us orders out there that with his own lips, and others talk about, 2nd Texas folks talk about Johnston was out there, and I think it's out there, obviously, that is where Johnston is watching Chalmers go over the hill, and that's where he tells Colonel Munford that checkmates them. And Munford says, well, I don't play chess and I can't see it. And Johnston says, trust me, that checkmates him, because he thinks then he has turned the new left flank. And we're going to see the results of that out there as well. Now, in addition to sending Chalmers and Jackson out there, you pull 2 brigades out of line in what has been your left flank that is now your center. When you move those 2 over there, you got a 2-brigade hole. So Johnston then calls 2 brigades from the Reserve Corps, Statham and Bowen, from Breckinridge's Reserve Corps. The other Breckinridge brigade will be Trabue that'll go in on the other flank. They will move forward through this area and take position on this front, and we'll catch up with them just a little bit later. So Shiloh is one of those battles that is such a soldier's battle on the ground, right here viewpoint, that it's hard to see the bigger picture. But every once in a while there is a larger picture that emerges, and a decision will make a large-scale effect on the battle. And I think Johnston's premature turning movement at this point in the 18th Wisconsin Camp is one of those large decisions that affects the battle. Yes, sir.
So why doesn't Johnston know Bragg has sent Lockett out there so that he'd be looking for that report?
Well, it gets a little bit into the night before this council of war that they've had. Bragg is kind of on the fence. Beauregard wants to go back to Corinth, and this is at Beauregard's headquarters, of course, south of the Confederate deployment area. Johnston says, no, I would fight them if they were me. They can present no greater front between these 2 creeks than we can. The more men they fight it, plug in there, the worse we can make it for them. Bragg apparently at one point sides with Polk, or with Beauregard. Polk sides with Johnston. Breckinridge is kind of out of it. He's not feeling well, and he's laying on the ground over there. Hardy's not there. Hardy's up with his front line because they're shooting off their guns and cheering at deer and all that, So they kind of mix what they think and so on. So Bragg is kind of leaning a little bit toward Beauregard and getting out of here and so on. So as they break up that meeting, as Johnston firmly declares, puts his foot down, I would fight them if they're me, and we shall attack at daylight tomorrow, and all that. As they're all walking away, it's interesting. There's several accounts of what's being said by the various officers as they're walking away. And Johnston, as he's walking away, he's kind of, you ever made a decision and try to prop yourself up a little bit? Yeah, I know I made the right decision. I know I did. And you talk to your buddy or something, wasn't that the right decision? Don't you think that so and so? You're kind of propping yourself up a little bit. Johnston does a lot of that and talks to some of his staff and so on. It's there that Bragg tells Lockett, I'm not so sure that this is the right thing. I want you to go out at 4 o'clock in the morning and go scout that federal left and see if it's really turnable and see what we can do and so on. So as Lockett goes out, obviously Lockett's not going to tell Johnston, and Bragg is not going to tell Johnston that, hey, I've sent out one of my staff to undermine your plan to attack tomorrow. If we can get word back in time that yeah, they do stretch to the river and that they're entrenched to the eyes and all that, then maybe Johnston will call this thing off. So it kind of goes back to the inner squabbling of the high command even the night before. Does that make sense? That answer your question?
Well, I was wondering, because I assume Johnston sent Lockett.
No, Bragg does. No,
Right,
Bragg does.
okay, so
Yeah.
and that he would be waiting for a report.
No. By all accounts, Bragg Johnston doesn't even recognize Lockett, and of course Lockett goes on to become a major cog in Confederate engineering. He's the one that lays out the Vicksburg defenses and the Corinth defenses and all of that. But at this point, Lockett is just, I believe, a captain on Bragg's staff, engineering captain, and it's Bragg that sends him out.
Okay.
So this is kind of like, this would be like Johnson's oh my God moment. right about here. When
Johnston kind of gets a dose of reality at this point, yeah. And moving on into the story of, he kind of holds behind the line here, and he moves forward a little bit maybe later on, and Governor Harris writes some accounts of when they cross some of these creeks that we're going to cross up here. He talks about, I remember, sitting on a horse for an hour here, the orderlies are going to fetch water, and I remember that creek right there just like it was, and this is 35 years later, I think Johnston is yes, having a moment that, I've sent everybody off over there. This was premature, and we have got a new left flank out here that we've got to turn, and I don't have so many. I've only got 4 brigades out here to do it. The other 12 or 12 are off on the other side of the battlefield, so it might take a little more pushing than what I have exerted, effort than what I've exerted beforehand. And if I have to go up to the front lines to lead it myself, I'll do it. So you can already see kind of the wheel starting to turn here for Johnston a little bit, that we're going to have to get a little bit more down and dirty here if we're going to do this.
He's out here what he thinks is the right flank, or the left flank of the Union Army, and then when he finds out it's not,
He is going to move to the new left flank to get a picture of this. And I've never read this in any other books or anything, but I'm firmly convinced that he goes back across Locust Grove, because at this point there's nothing. Probably Bowen and Statham are still coming, and Chalmers and Jackson are still on their way out there. There's nothing out there between him and the Federals. Yeah, so I think he goes back across Locust Grove, and Locust Grove is just right there. We're gonna march parallel with it. But I think he goes back across and ranges on these hills. They set up artillery, and that's what we're going to look at. Some of these tablets that are off the park that mark Girardi's position and Gage's position, if you want to go there. And he will position the forces and send them forward, and he's on the front lines there as well. Then I think he comes back into this area, and step for step where he is. I don't know if he comes back to the Wisconsin camp, but we did always in some of the creek bottoms and so on out of here. But he ultimately emerges on Bowen's front, which we'll see that as well.
You could have, at the time of the battle, you could have seen through the peach orchard from here, or pretty close to it. Some of the reports you see, the way they read, it's like they're seeing things.
At places you could. I've never read anything that you could see from here to the peach orchard. Now, we do know Chalmers and Jackson get close enough a little farther forward that they exchange some real long-range shots, several hundred yards or so on, and that's skirmishers at best. So I don't think they're ever really close. Probably what you're thinking about is Stewart makes the comment that as he is nervously wandering around out there, the fighting's going on here for 2 or 3 hours, you know, to his right, and nothing's going on here yet. And he says at one point I had a vantage point that I could see through the woods and I could see Prentice's camps. And I see the Union flag go down and the Pelican flag, he says, go up. What's the Pelican flag? 1st Louisiana of Gladden's brigade there. So he says he sees the Pelican flag go up, and he knows something's going on here, and that's not good. So apparently somehow you could see from Stewart's position to Prentice's position. Prentice's headquarters just right out of here, not far at all.
But when Hurlbut got to the south side, when I said Cathedral, I'm thinking Cottonfield. I think of them one and the same sometimes. They got to the south side of they got basically the road and stopped because they could see that there wasn't any point going any further anymore.
Right.
Because Prentice's camps had been overrun.
Yeah, and they could see Confederates out there, and of course they're going to have skirmishers farther forward, and the Confederates are going to have skirmishers. So you're meeting something out there. So how far Jackson and Chalmers actually go out here, I'm not sure. I think if you go down here, there's a pretty good creek, and then you go up kind of where Prentice's headquarters are, and then it flattens out in there. We saw all that in the dark last year. But there are some folds in there that you could get up and you could see probably that far if it's cleared out a little more than normal.
It's hard to envision today.
It is, yeah. This is some of the highest ground. If you look on the topo map, anybody got a what is it? Not altitude, but whatever it tells us the elevation. Elevation, yeah, that's what it is. This is some of the highest ground out in this area on the battlefield. Of course, you don't have to look at it. If we knew the elevation, that wouldn't tell us anything because we don't have anything prepared to. So. But it's pretty high ground right here. Any other questions? All right, well, let's get on.
Have you been at the other battery before?
I was driving.
Actually out here. That's probably the foot on here. Used to be the one for the wheel, probably one over there too. But the next tablet we're going to see is across Locust Grove Branch will be Girardi's battery. So as Jackson moves forward, Girardi will be out here. Then they all turn around and go back south to Locust Grove Branch, which is exactly what Johnston will do as well. We didn't necessarily need to stop here, but you'll see what was his battery out there.
These are the guys I feel for.
Out here on this side with no bullets.
We'll go over up and down some pretty good little things here, so we'll go a little bit slower and let everybody kind of catch up. Mona, you remember last time you and I were out here? Probably been 10 years ago or so. We did a Johnston hike. We didn't do that. We only had what, 2 hours or 3 Confederate Memorial Day. We didn't go south of the Locust Grove and all that like we're going to do, but there was a woman. She was about 8.5 months pregnant and was doing all of this with us, you know. And I worried the whole time. I thought,
you know how to birth babies?
at least we got a vet, so I thought we were going to have to. That kid now is probably 8-10 years old, but at any rate, all right, ready to go? Actually, we're going right along the park boundary. That's that big turn we made, so we're going just right across here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And when we get to Larkindale Field here, we'll cross and go to this cabin. If y'all want to, we can go to that one. That's up to y'all, but we're definitely going to go to
Those are now
that one.
Trust property, those tablets?
No, those are completely private property.
Okay.
They were put up 100 years ago and probably hadn't been painted since 100 years ago. We're going to go see if they've been painted. Bring some paint. Yeah, we should have. We're facing across a pretty good creek down here. Last time I was here, it was in March. Anybody on the trust, it was the Color Bear weekend out of Memphis, and we did tours here in March. Somebody's talking about iffy weather in March. This was, I believe March the 1st. It was right the first weekend in March. and it was snowing, no kidding. The temperature was in the 30s probably, and it was snowing, and we did all of this. We didn't do extensively going off the park and all that we were going to do today, but it was snowing. I brought a group through here, and poor guy fell in the creek down here, and he went all the way up to about here in that creek. I felt sorry for him.
I don't care what can be done.
You want to throw the camera over or hand it over or something? Well, if you start to fall, pitch the camera forward.
Yeah, that helps.
Hey, that's good. Way to go.
All right, then.
Somebody's going to get somebody bottoming out.
What,
Just go film. You want to get somebody bottoming out.
Sometimes takes a while to get the center of gravity in this position.
Got my money's worth out of this, okay?
Somebody blow now when Terry's going across.
It's got a little wiggle to it. It kind of like goes.
Just gotta put that.
Well, you chucked the long sleeves and everything, you. There you go.
Let's see.
What we're going to do now is go off the park, and I caution our viewing public at home that we have gotten permission to be off the park. Never go anywhere off the park without getting the landowner's permission, but she graciously allowed us to do this. We're going to go across Locust Grove Branch, which is a little farther to the south, and then up these tall ridges. Y'all probably have read about this, but it's hard to envision unless you actually go up these things. It's as bad or worse than Deal Branch Ravine. You'll see when we get up there. But on top of those high ridges is where Girard's battery, Jackson's brigade, on this front will deploy from their march along the Bark Road. Chalmers Brigade will be a little farther to the east, and they'll begin to move forward. And Jackson's brigade is going to go just like we did, only in reverse. When we come back, we'll go just like they did, up this ridge here into Larkin-Bell Field, and then hit the 71st Ohio Stewart's brigade in the other end of the field up there. So pretty hard terrain. In terms of Johnston, of course, we're focusing on Johnston today. I'm convinced that Johnston is on these ridges, talking to the 2nd Texas, talking to the 19th Alabama, Joseph Wheeler and others on these ridges and sending them forward. And I believe it's up on these tall ridges that is where Johnston is watching Chalmers go off over the hill and move forward, and that's where he says that checkmates them. And of course, we know that it doesn't, but Johnston believes that it does. All right, let's head out. Like this, what do?
Go right through it.
They just go right through and march right through it like there's no water and any of that. If I guarantee you, if I was a Civil War soldier and I came out on these fields and I came to this, I wouldn't want to, 10 o'clock in the morning go right through the water, because I would be thinking for the rest of the day my feet are going to be wet and I'm going to get blisters, and blisters hurt, and I don't care if you're a soldier or who you are. I'm going to try to find the best way across this thing without getting my feet, and legs all the way up to here wet. So
the same thing we did.
Try to find the best way across, and then you reform maybe on the other side. And if you think about it, I mean, just look at the terrain here. The Federals are arrayed. You all know where Stewart's headquarters is up there, and the camps in the 71st Ohio and so on. You're out of harm's way right here. You're covered by the hill, so you're not going to be under fire. So you can take your time a little bit more and get across this.
Sorry. Anybody like Kenny Chesney?
It's much muckier and flooded more than it is now in April 1862. That's another thing, getting your ammo wet. And you know, you stick your gun barrel in the mud or any of that. All right.
Oh, that's not cool. Thought you might like that. Just drop the part down.
So to reach the top, right?
Check out how high that is.
Tim lied to us. This is Bill Branford Van. No pictures of anybody falling. No.
This is steeper than the north end of Gill's Ranch, isn't it?
Well, looks like if we're down here when we got to do it. Yeah.
Is it all right if we wait for you?
Girard's Georgia battery position, and of course, by extension, Jackson's position. They're going to come off the Bark Road, which is immediately south of us, and take position right here on the lip of this hill. This is the artillery fire that Stewart is picking up that is really worrying him for a moment. Oh, I thought we had everybody.
How many guns were there?
I think they had 6 guns. I would have to
Battery
check. Sometimes Confederate batteries have 4, but I think they had 6 early in the war. Yeah. For a time, a Union battery from Hurlbut's division will move forward. That's Mann's battery, Edward Brotzman. It's Edward.
What is it, man?
Brotzman, Mann's battery.
No, I meant 409.
409. Yeah, if you're looking on the map, it's well south of the park.
You're keeping score at home, little leaguers.
Yeah, if you
409.
Some of y'all are marking them off the list, I think.
Yep. Yeah, we need to go 390. Hold
Yeah,
up.
409 right here. Now, I will give y'all an option. Do you see where we went through Larkin Bell Field right here? South across Spain Branch, and then right up the hill to 409 right there. All of this huge chunk of land right here is owned by this family that let us on here, so we appreciate that. Give y'all the option at this point if y'all want to skirt across the little ravine right there and go to Gage's battery. That's Chalmers' position.
Yeah.
399 right there. We'll scoot right across there. It's up to y'all.
Yeah.
Who used to maintain the flag there?
It's only like 3 inches. I mean,
I haven't nailed it down, but I'm convinced that's the long rice thing. 1920s probably.
There was a flagpole.
There's a flagpole there to show visitors
we walked.
where it was.
You could see here.
So from the road you could see here. at one
Yeah, you
time.
could see across the. In fact, when we go back to Stewart, we'll look back across here and see the high ridge over here, and you could see it. There's another one of these over at Gage's position as well.
No, they two bailed, right? 2 people.
Yeah. Do we need to holler at them and tell them we're going to be just a little while longer, or
Probably a good idea.
you got a number, or we can call them, or
No, I sure don't. I'll just
we'll go holler at them.
So we're going to go back by way of the road.
He was kidding. You have to come up here.
We're going to eat lunch while we're up here.
Before we go, I want to get a picture of everybody in front of the...
Okay.
Oh, awesome.
15 years, so we may need to spread out just a little bit when we get up on top of the hill, but of course the sun's not painted bright red, it's easy to miss. It's just not a bit. Yeah, we get across the ravine. You can see the backwater down here too, which adds another element to all of this.
Speaking of building. Oh, Marvin, look at that. We think that's deeper than Bill Branch.
I would say so.
We think maybe at least 20 feet.
The only way we'll know is if somebody goes down there and we get a reference.
There you go.
Volunteers. All we gotta do is push somebody. They'll be down there.
Count how long it takes them.
How many trees they got? Pop off. Bounce off some
There's a great account in Chalmers, or in Gage's battery. I think it's at the U.S. Army Military History Institute, talking about this battery crosses this. And it talks about, I didn't hold up, did it? Talks about how to go down these things and across. They had to corduroy the bottoms. Y'all know what corduroying is, laying trees across. Had to let the cannon down by ropes, you know, and then pull them up by ropes and get the horses down singly and individually. That Chalmers does this, and more remarkably, the Gage does this, is an absolute miracle.
How long it took them.
Gage doesn't keep up with Chalmers, so
what he moves.
he loses them as he moves forward. Of course, with artillery, you don't have to keep up right behind the line. You can cover from a position like this farther out. And if you could be able to see here, you know, it would be an amazing view. Of course, you look at your map, the road, the modern day road's not far down the ravine here.
We could have seen Stewart's camp.
Oh yeah,
You mean
see,
elevation wise, isn't it?
yeah.
Quick walk and jump.
Real quick for Paul.
They're trying to keep up with the advance, so instead of backtracking, they're trying to just go straight forward.
Right. All right, now we got options. We can go back the exact same way we did, or we can go down to this little creek that we just crossed and go down to Locust Grove flat, and then up Locust Grove to where we left the folks. Is that flat? Is that what your fault? Or we can go down here and go up Locust Grove. And then it's going to be wet anywhere.
I think that's a controlled fall going down.
Maybe they left their ropes from behind from when they lowered the cannons. We could, no, probably not.
Alrighty.
Is this
Surrender flag?
Tim,
Get it out just in case.
Yes.
Shakarag Church. Where was that?
It was on up farther Locust Grove, between here and basically where Doc Meek was. It was on the south side of the creek.
Didn't they use that to like where they formed up, or I forget.
Of course, he's south of the branch, as we saw, and then he comes back onto what is today the park, of course. And somewhere in this area, again, we don't have his exact footprints out there, but somewhere in this area between here and where we were with the 18th Wisconsin camp, he will begin to move forward behind the new Confederate right flank that consists of Chalmers out there, and then Jackson, whose front we're on right now, and then Bowen, and then Statham. And eventually he will move forward behind Bowen's brigade, which is what we're kind of angling over to. We're going to cross this creek. We didn't need to cross it where we did a second ago. We'll cross it farther up where it's easier. But we'll follow Bowen's brigade through the Mule Lot, and then of course into the rest of the more famous areas. The rest of history is, as they say. So we're back with Johnston and his movements, moving forward, moving to the north. And it's at this point, of course, that Bowen and Statham and Jackson and Chalmers are fighting and pushing forward, trying to push forward, but they're stalled. They can't move forward. And then, of course, Johnston has to start wielding his considerable charisma and getting the troops to move forward by personal example. And we'll see more of that as we move up. So we're going to skirt this creek. There's a old house foundation out there, and I thought if we passed it, I think it's right in the middle of all that thick stuff. I went around it, but if any of you are just dying to see an old house foundation, you can come back out here and locate it sometime. All right. It is. They're hard to tell. Statham would be, of course, a little farther down the line. Johnston will move forward in rear of Bowen's brigade. Hudson's battery, you see the artillery here. Alfred Hudson will be killed on April the 6th. And I had somebody, this was years ago, arguing about Alfred Hudson. Well, Hudson's battery wasn't even there. And so I pulled up the compiled service record. And on Alfred Hudson's compiled service record, it says killed April 6, 1862, Shiloh. And that's pretty good evidence that he was here at least, and they were here. We all know the story of Johnston and riding up and down the line, the Mule Lot that we got one more ravine to go in there. And so we don't have to go into a lot of detail on that. Basically what he does, he rides up and down the line in order to spur the men forward, get the men moving forward. They're not too interested in it. It always amazes me the level of leadership you have on this flank. You've got the former Vice President of the United States, the Governor of Tennessee, Division Commander Jones Withers, and the Army Commander Albert Sidney Johnston himself. And nobody could get them to go until Albert Sidney Johnston waded in amongst the troops and got them to go. And we all know the stories about, you know, he tapped their bayonets with the tin cup, and he addressed them that today the Arkansas men, I know of your prowess with a Bowie knife or the Arkansas toothpick, but we'll wield a nobler weapon today, and so on. So he obviously, and Professor Rowland, writes a lot about his personal charisma, and I think that's very correct, in that he could get men to do what others couldn't get him to do. So eventually, his blood is up. His son describes it as the lion trembling with irresistible ardor, and the men are ready to go. Johnston's ready to go, and he wheels Fire Eater around and pushes him forward and says, "I will lead you." And of course, he leads the attack. There's a little bit of debate, and we don't really know exactly where Johnston was when he was wounded, how far he goes. We know he trails Bowen's brigade. The Hamburg-Savannah road, the river road, kind of curves in like this a little bit, and by all accounts, Bowen's brigade will actually cross that road as it moves forward and hit some of MacArthur's brigade there, the 9th Illinois and 12th Illinois and so on. Statham will move across the field. Where exactly Johnston goes, Harris, his account later on, that he takes Reed back in all these ravines and so on that we talked about. To me, Harris's memory is pretty vivid. He says, "I remember that creek where the orderlies went and got fetched the water, and I remember Johnston sitting right here on horseback and all that." And he has Reed take him out into the field, and then they move across the road, of course. So my view is probably he's somewhere on this front, perhaps out partially in this field, which we're going to see the terrain as we go, and it'll affect, how far he goes affects how much of him is seen and all of that. And then there's the dispute and the argument over whether he was shot by his own men. Wiley Sword makes the point that he shot behind the knee. That is countered by the argument, of course, that anybody, I know Mona's a horse rider. Anybody else horse riders? When you're on a horse and a horse is a little bit nervous, especially with all the guns and all that, and I don't know whether the Fire Eater was nervous or not, but a horse very rarely stands still when he's a little bit nervous. He's going to be prancing around and turning around like this.
Well, if he's directing the troops too, he's going to be facing.
He could have been turning around, pointing and all that. So there's really no way to determine conclusively which way a man on a horseback is facing at any certain time. So that's another one of those things probably that we never will know. But we know he is wounded, of course, and we'll deal with his wounding in depth a little bit farther forward. So let's tramp on over into the mule lot and into the citadel.
A reference for the parks so they know where each one is?
That's the original numbering system when the Chattanooga Foundry created them, built them. They numbered each one, and if you'll look on each of the original ones, a lot of them have been replaced by now, but each of the original ones will have a different number. It's just their tracking system, kind of like serial number, if you will.
Okay, all the times I've looked at things, I've never seen.
No, that's not original. Of course, these are cast iron too, the wood and so on. And I don't know. I know barrels had serial numbers on them, but I don't know if limbers did or wheels and all of that. But yeah, that's just a strictly part numbering thing. I've always viewed this area as kind of, the mule lot area as where the Confederate line of battle would jump off from, and talking about these lulls and so on. They would attack up the hill to attack the Union line, and we know there were successive attacks, and they would be beaten back and back and forth for a couple of hours from about 12 until 2 or so. And that's what Johnston is witnessing and realizing that these guys aren't going to be able to do this. And each time they would fall back under the cover of the hill. And again, we can see the cover that's provided down in the dip, because the Federals aren't necessarily on the military crest. They're a little bit actually behind the geographic crest. Actually, when we top this ridge, we'll see kind of what we're talking about, and that is to give them on the reverse slope cover for their artillerymen and their guns, and particularly their limbers and horses and so on. So it's probably in this area, I think, that Johnston will ride up and down the line, talking to his troops, maybe tapping their bayonets and all that, but then he'll turn to lead them on. And we get a panoramic view as we stop here. He came out right here. Bowen's brigade, of course, is going to kind of angle across the river road a little bit to 9th Illinois. You can see the Willard's battery there. The 9th Illinois a little bit farther, and then the 12th and then the 50th. Where Johnston is when he's wounded, that's another one of those things we don't know. I don't think anybody but Johnston would know that, if Johnston himself knew it, because Harris doesn't know it, doesn't find out until he finds him under the tree over there. So where exactly Johnston is wounded, We just don't know. But somewhere in the general vicinity. I can't see him going all the way toward the Union line. I can't see him coming much farther than, you know, the top of the hill, maybe poking his head over the hill or something. So we just don't know. We do know, of course, that he rides across the road then to kind of this high ground over here, probably to get a look at what's going on with Chalmers and Jackson over there. Maybe he couldn't see from here. We know the Bell cabin set right here, Sarah Bell's cabin, and so he wanted to look the other direction. And it's there, of course, that in mid-sentence he stops. He's talking to Governor Harris, and he hears some artillery open up over here, and he sends Governor Harris to once the attack is successful, he sends Governor Harris to get Statham's brigade going again. That argues against this lull thing, because even after Johnston breaks this line and Pugh's brigade falls back, Johnston is immediately thinking, get Statham's brigade going again, and Governor Harris goes and delivers that order, and it starts. So you know, that's, if you want to talk about a lull, that's all of 2 or 3 minutes there. So, you know, I'm not a big fan of the lull, but he does ride over, of course, to the where the monument is. The tree was there at the time, and by all accounts, that's where Governor Harris comes back from this errand that he's been running and finds it. So let's go on over to the monument, and then we'll walk down and finish up. Walk right by lunch. Oh, so close. Oh, so close. Mortally wounded here, which, you know, was it on this particular spot or in this general area, it's hard to determine. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter. We do know this is where Governor Harris found him and came back to him, and Johnston, he says, was reeling in the saddle. And I'm not a big fan of, you know, I wasn't there, Governor Harris was, but to me, reeling in the saddle is what? You know, like, oh, they hit me or something, and the way most of the accounts describe it is he's slumping, kind of about to fall out of it. And if that's what reeling means, that, you know, that's fine. And he drops the reins, and Harris obviously can tell something is desperately wrong. And that's when they take him, of course, down in the ravine. Let's walk down there and finish up the story of old Albert Sidney.